So I'm going to invite up to the podium Anthony Townsend. He's a senior research scientist at the Rudin Center at NYU. For those of you who aren't local, that's the New York University. He's been studying innovation and cities and has a fantastic book called Smart Cities. So he's been very engaged in some of what our keynote is going to talk about today, which we started to talk about a little bit at the end of the last panel. So it's my pleasure to invite Anthony up to introduce our keynote.
Well, welcome back, everybody. There was quite a bit of talk in the last session before lunch about some of the technological changes that are starting to happen in transportation. Heard about Uber, we talked about Lyft, talked a little bit about big data and real-time data for planning. And if it wasn't clear to you already, transportation is just the newest sector of the economy that is about to get disrupted, to use the Silicon Valley cliche that floats around on the West Coast quite a bit. I like to think of transportation sort of being where the newspaper business was 10 years ago. And there's a tremendous amount of change happening, and everyone in the industry is looking in the opposite direction. And it really hit them in the back of the head and destroyed businesses, destroyed civic life in many American cities, and we're sort of struggling to figure out what comes after that. So I think we need to have a bit of hubris as we think about the role of technology in cities. We've been looking at this at the Rudin Center for the last year. We just published last month a forecast of kind of speculative futures looking out at 2030, generously funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, which was titled Reprogramming Mobility. We basically played out how all this technological change might happen within the existing infrastructure and social, economic, regulatory context. And you can find that at reprogrammingmobility.org if you want to take a look at it. And more importantly, aside from just looking at the technologies, we were interested in the land use impacts, the impacts on mobility, and the impacts on the planning process itself. Now, Gabe Klein, who's our keynote speaker, he's been at the center of this for at least a decade. 2002, he joined Zipcar in Washington, D.C., and led a really breathtaking expansion of car sharing there that became a model for how the company would expand throughout the world. He's taken 2 stints, didn't get enough punishment the first time around, so he went back for another one. City government, heading up transportation, first in D.C. and then in Chicago. And really just too many accomplishments to list, so you should look at the bio there. And now he's serving as Chief Operating Officer for Bridge, which is a startup based in Boston, Massachusetts that is basically trying to reinvent transit. It's one of the most exciting mobility startups, I think, in the US right now. So without further ado, Gabe, please join us.
Thank you, Anthony. All right. Okay, well, thanks everybody for having me, and thanks to all those organizations that were up there who I've gotten the opportunity to work with, particularly Rockefeller and IDTP. It's been super helpful to me in my work. I thought I'd talk a little bit today about where we've been the last 5 and 10 years, where we are now in terms of the internet age versus the industrial revolution 100 years ago. I mean, this is the most exciting time in transportation in the last 100 years, absolutely. But the rate of change we're seeing is actually a lot like what we saw once before. What's coming and why we should embrace change versus hide from it or avoid it. And before we do that, though, I actually added a couple slides this morning. I have to bum people out first. I was speaking in Fort Lauderdale recently for the Urban Land Institute. I was recently a fellow there. And we're in South Florida where they are at the highest risk probably in the United States of going underwater in the next 40 years, literally. And I used to live down there. When it rains now hard, A1A, which is the highway up the coast, regularly is submerged in water, as are some of the stores adjacent to it. But nobody would talk about it. It is not a subject that people talk about. And I know people, we were talking over lunch, People are a little tired of hearing about global warming and how devastating it's going to be. But this is a very interesting article that I read by Noam Chomsky, one of our the great intellectuals of our time. And he wrote about the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, which some people think is a little bit conservative, a conservative monitor of what's happening in the physical world. And in this new draft report that they put out, they basically said that we're likely facing the end of civilization. So that's pretty depressing, right? And they reaffirmed that the vast majority of known fuel reserves must be left in the ground to avert intolerable risks to future generations. So that's a pretty strong statement. Meanwhile, we have firms out there, private firms and governments, that seem to be hell-bent on exploiting every last drop of those resources, which is sort of a fascinating dichotomy, isn't it? Who listens to the TED Radio Hour on NPR on the weekends? All right, did anybody hear it this weekend or on Friday? It was really fascinating. They had a bunch of different people on there, including David Christian, who's a British scientist, I guess. And he basically outlined how the Big Bang happened 14 billion years ago. Then 10 billion years ago, the single-cell organism appeared. Then multi-cell organisms a few hundred million years later. Then 65 million years ago, an asteroid hit the Earth, wiped out all the dinosaurs. And basically what he was saying is, and maybe you guys already knew this, I sort of didn't, that if it wasn't for the dinosaurs getting extinct, then we really wouldn't have been here. We flourished as a result of that. So basically, he's saying that we're an accident. It's okay to laugh. And humans only appeared 200,000 years ago. So what's fascinating about that is a couple things. One is this is an absolute fleck of time. That in the last 100 years, the damage that we have done to the planet is unparalleled in all of time. But also, we're the first beings, on the upside, there is some positive here. On the upside, we're the first beings in 4 billion years that have sort of complex communication methods. And we're very sophisticated in our thinking. And the technology that we've developed is unbelievable. And it's moving at an exponential rate, which also is important in transportation. We'll talk about that a bit later. But the irony is that our use of fossil fuels, and I loved his quotes, over the past 100 years is actually destroying the very environment that facilitated the sort of accidental creation of our species. And we are hastening our own extinction. And I think it's painful to face that, but it's very, very important as a backdrop to all the things that we're seeing. So let's talk about what's happening. We just had the NACTO conference last week in San Francisco. There are so many cities engaged, not just big cities like New York, Chicago, DC, cities all over the country. Arlington, Virginia being one that's a real case study, by the way, and how to change a suburb into a city. And we just announced, actually, the global street design guidelines that we'll be working on over the next year. So very exciting stuff happening. But I had to bum you out first to bring you back up. Also, people are interested in this stuff. Like, I'm amazed. I went to Nashville to talk, and they stuck me in this gigantic coliseum where they usually have, like, midget wrestling. I'm serious. They had had midget wrestling, like, a few weeks before, which is not appropriate. And now, granted, we only filled the floor area, but there's a real interest in this topic and in cities. The other week, we had a Coalition for Smarter Growth benefit in the pouring rain in D.C., and we had a record 300 people turn out in the rain, standing room only. So again, people are engaged in a way that they haven't been before because they really understand how the changes that we can make on the ground affect their quality of life, affect real estate values, affect their health and their children's health. There are also new technologies coming to the fore. This actually happens to be a friend of mine, Esther Dyson, this was the first car that she ever drove. I think she's from New York. This is a solar-powered velomobile. It's a bike and a car, and it's people-powered, and there's no fossil fuels powering this thing. But it really serves most of your needs in the city. I was out in Portland for ULI, and saw these electric-powered, refrigerated delivery trucks that a lot of the restaurants are using now to get their food from regional distributors. Other good news, I work in Cambridge a day or two a week now, and everywhere in Cambridge there's raised crosswalks. The pedestrian is definitely the priority now there. And this was in Vancouver, where they're a little bit ahead of us in the US, and they've really built cycling infrastructure into their plans for streetscapes. Or out in Portland, where bioswales are now the standard. When you do a streetscape, when you redo a street, instead of building in sewer infrastructure, you build this in. It's more sustainable. It's actually cheaper, by the way. It can be. And look, there's some public seating. And I was out in Seattle as well, and they continue to build on their success with the light rail and the streetcar system, and they have really a public-private partnership. How many people have been to the Amazon campus or just seen it out there? It's worth going. So nobody's been, but you should go. I didn't actually go into Amazon, but it's amazing. They partnered and basically created an entirely new town within the city, all based on public transit and open shared public spaces. And even alleys are really being utilized in different ways. This is actually in Seattle, but you see this in Charleston, South Carolina. You see it really all over the country, in San Francisco. And waterfronts. This is the Vancouver waterfront. I took a panoramic picture. There's actually some bike infrastructure if you look closely. They basically redone the entire thing. There's planes landing in the water. And then this is in DC, actually right next to the waterfront, where they've created a space next to the ballpark that's regularly programmed with fun activities for people. You know, our waterfronts were industrial out of necessity for so long, and now we're really reinventing them, and also obviously letting out a lot of, creating a lot of value in terms of real estate. Actually, my wife and daughter in that bottom right photo, I discovered the panoramic function on my iPhone. I've just gone crazy with it. It's a blast. And you know, people are realizing this is actually in a rural place. I was on my bike, by the way, going 21 miles an hour. I actually was on my bike, but I don't know what that 21 is. But there's a recognition that speed kills, just like cigarettes kill, just like sugary drinks kill. And actually, there's an interesting report last night on, I think it was Marketplace, that like a 20% increase, I think it was a 20% increase in the tax on sugary sodas, like cuts the intake by 40% or something. I'm probably way off on that number, but Coke's numbers came out and they were 14% off, mostly due to Mexico raising the tax on sugary drinks. So incentives do matter, enforcement matters, all of these things matter in changing people's behavior. And on the proactive side, government, often in partnership with the private sector, are creating shared systems. Bike share has just exploded. The newest system being Pronto in Seattle, which I actually got to work on that system on the private side for a bit. And I had to go to France to find these bikes. But these systems are really, in some ways, almost replacing what we lost with the streetcars. You know, that's my theory. We lost the neighborhood-to-neighborhood connectivity with a streetcar, and this is providing some of that. It's not the same, but it's putting some of that back. And again, technology is a big piece of this. The fact that, like, because we had a system in DC, we had the first system in North America. We had 10 stations. It was wired up in the ground through the power company. It was a $70,000 construction project. Took about 2 to 3 months to put in. Now they take about 45 minutes to put in. And there's no electricity. We're not using any fossil fuels. It's all solar, and they're modular, and you can expand them. Makes a huge difference. So it's not just technology in the cloud. It's also technology in the way that it interacts with the things on the street, or the Internet of Things, I guess, as people say. And marketing. You know, government has realized that if you want people to adopt something, it's great to just put it out there, and that's very important. But you can also actually show people how it works, make it fun and whimsical. In this case, we used IDEO, who designed the Apple mouse and has done a lot of great branding work. We spent some money, and we really branded this thing like a private sector company would. And we were just joking over lunch that, you know, if Coca-Cola can sell people sugar water really effectively, we should be able to sell people bike share, something that's good for them, using some of the same tactics. This also is my wife. She'd probably be mortified if she knew she's in my slideshow, pregnant. But again, marketing can be fun. Government can have fun and be whimsical and connect, in this case, to the Cherry Blossom Festival, to something that's community-based. This was going all over Twitter last week. You know, people are finally understanding that bike lanes on an arterial street make sense, separated bike lanes. And one of the things when I was over in the Netherlands a few years ago, you know, I said, wow, like, people are behaving so well. Like, the cars are so respectful. You know, they don't have any stoplights. They have traffic circles everywhere. And I mean, they have some stoplights, but not as many. And I said, you know, why is this? And they said, well, because everybody that's in those cars is a cyclist. And so I think we're finally getting enough people on bikes. And if you've been to DC lately, you'll see, like, on some streets, you have more people on bikes than cars at rush hour. And that's when you really start to see things change. So what is government doing? I mean, a lot of what we're doing is repurposing space. In this case, in DC, as I was working in the streetcar system, we looked at where the streetcar network ran. And when we built our 37-mile plan for the streetcar, guess what? It mimicked a lot of the old system. As we had big, wide boulevards, the land use hadn't changed that significantly in 50 years. But in some places, we were just not going to be able to put the streetcar back. So I asked the mayor, what if we put a bike lane there? And we had a great mayor. And he said, yeah, just don't screw it up. Then I proceeded to totally screw it up, which is a whole other story I don't have time to tell. And then we had to go out and fix it. But the great thing about, you know, Mayor Fenty, Mayor Emanuel, I think Mayor Bloomberg as well, is you could make mistakes. And government is not, I think somebody said this on the last panel, I think it may have been Linda Bailey. You know, we're not incentivized to make mistakes, typically. Like, the thing you don't want to do is be really creative and end up in the newspaper. And I can tell you, when I was in Chicago, people were shocked. I was, like, out there talking about what we're doing. I was doing interviews in the newspaper, and some of the old guard, they were like, what are you doing? I was like, well, this is how we're going to sell what we're doing to the public. Anyway, we did this in DC and Chicago, where we took excess capacity. In this case, there are 8,000 to 12,000 cars a day, and there's room for about 20,000 to 24,000 cars. So what happens when you have that problem? Does anybody know? You don't need to be a planner or an engineer. When you have too much capacity and too few cars, then they speed. And so people were averaging about 35 to 40 miles an hour. And so we put in a two-way protected bike lane. And speeds dropped down, still a little bit over the speed limit, but closer to it. And then we created a way for people to bike downtown. And this has been really important because people say, I'd like to ride, but I'll never ride in downtown traffic. And that's why if you look at, you know, whether it's New York or San Francisco now or DC or Portland, places that are held up as cycling cities actually have the chutzpah to put these things in the hardest place, not the easiest place. You know, it's not hard to put it out on the edge of town, but to put them right through the downtown will change people's behavior. Although I will say, we use bike lanes actually to make the streets safer for cars. And when the mayor came in, he wanted to do 100 miles of protected bike facilities. And we coined that term, actually, protected bike lanes, I think, because cycle tracks seemed like a bunch of guys in Lycra running around, right? And so we coined this new term because that's really what we were trying to do, is protect people. In this case, we had a lot of accidents here with automobiles. There was no striping when I got to Chicago almost. I mean, seriously. They hadn't spent money on striping in years. And so we rationalized the roadway. And it became safer for the automobiles, as well as providing a route between downtown and communities. And we actually, also in Chicago, we have the busiest cycling street in America, Milwaukee Ave. And it's amazing, when you give people their own lane and you give people a bike signal, how they start to abide by the traffic laws. You know, there's a huge complaint. Cyclists just run lights, they do this, they do that. Well, you would too if you had nowhere to be. If you're not supposed to be in the sidewalk, you're not supposed to be in the car lane according to the cars. So when you give people their own space and a signal suddenly, and a bike box, look, they're all stopped. All the hipsters are stopped. Cities are also taking old industrial spaces like the waterfront in this case, the Bloomingdale Trail, which was an old Canadian Pacific rail line that linked 5 different neighborhoods, ranging from a Latino neighborhood all the way to a sort of a waspy neighborhood and everything in between. And this was a larger project, like $100 million, been sitting on the books for 12 years, and the mayor said, we're getting this done. And so before I even took the job, he said to me, Gabe, you have to do this, and you've got to get it done in my first term. And I said, okay. And then I went and talked to all the staff. I was like, okay, so I need the budget, I need this, I need that. They're like, oh, we have nothing. We have no plans, no budget. But that's what's fun about these jobs. So we had to figure out how to raise $91 million. We worked with the Trust for Public Lands and the Park District, how to come up with a conceptual plan, get everybody on board, do the engineering drawings, find the money for that. And within 18 months, we were going to construction. And you can do that in cities. Somebody said this earlier, cities are where everything's happening. This is where, mayors are directly responsible to their constituents. They aren't sitting up on Capitol Hill and then going, and making these huge national speeches and then going back to their little area of 2,000 people in Texas or whatever they're doing. Also, New York City really showed that you can do things cheap. Right before I took the job in DC, I met with Jeanette Sadekhan. And the one thing she impressed upon me, she had started not too long before me in New York. She's like, you don't have to spend a lot of money. You can do these pilots. And she was right. And I love this before and after picture of Union Square, because this, to me, that's a place you work, right? This is a place where you want to live, work, hang out, right? It's a totally different feeling with just paint, striping, and some greenery. But the other ingredient is the courage to actually do it. And we had this conversation at lunch also about the benevolent dictator and how, people don't like dictators unless they're doing the things that they like, right? And then suddenly they're okay. There is an element of that in these projects, in that you get people on board as much as possible, but you're never going to have everybody on board. But you still got to go out and do it. And my theory, and what I said at lunch, which might seem a little bit controversial, but I've studied this over the years. I think 85 to 90% of people are basically lemmings. And if they've never seen something before, you got to show it to them. Do a pilot, show it to them, do it on the cheap, then get their buy-in. Because most people can't see the future. They can't envision what you're talking about. And so you got to do it. And you got to show it to them, and then you can roll it out. And that's what we did in Chicago. The first month we were there, we rolled out our first protected bike lane. That was in 2011. And you can see, just setting your mind to it and saying, we're going to do this with the backing of the mayor makes a huge difference. And planning is super important. And I have all the respect in the world for planners and engineers, although I'm neither. But at the end of the day, you got to do it, or it doesn't matter. It's just a plan on the shelf. The urban street design guidelines that's our holy grail. That's how we're able to get things done now in partnership with our states that often hold us back and say, well, I don't see anything codified in writing on that, so I'm going to sort of tell you no. Well, now, 7 states, I think a number of cities have adopted this. Is it like 40 cities? And the Urban Land Institute, when I was a fellow there, adopted this, which is a big deal. ULI is not known to everybody, but they're a pretty powerful organization that but is the sort of industry organization for real estate. And basically, it's because we've tried a lot of things, and people have had enough time now to look and see the results and realize that, this is good for business. It makes the city a more pleasant place, makes it move better throughput, makes people want to live here. And again, we've had enough time to study some of the stuff in New York and in DC. We've seen, for instance, around Capitol Bike Share, we've seen a 16% increase in retail around Capitol Bike Share stations. They've also done studies and seen homeless people's mental health go up dramatically, and I mean the quality of their mental health, when they give them bike share memberships. So these are real numbers, and those are, you can't argue with that. It works. Also, you look at the cities and states that are most successful, there is a correlation often between how safe they are. And I do like to point to DC. Now, obviously, DC's land use is a bit different than the entire state of New York, although New York's seen great improvement as well. But we have the lowest fatality rate per population. It was also announced last week we're the most expensive place to live in the country. Now, I moved there in 1995 when Marion Barry was doing his 4th term. This was the dashiki phase, and if you remember Marion Barry, he is a riot, and I consider him a friend, but he's a very funny politician. He's also extremely brilliant. But you know, we've seen a huge increase in safety there, and actually all across the country, even in places like Missouri, in Mississippi. This makes people want to live in these places and actually raise families in these places. Okay, so why now? As I was saying earlier, the Industrial Revolution, people don't remember it, obviously, because we weren't born, but there was an incredible rate of change. You know, things have changed dramatically, yet in some ways they stay the same. Like we think, oh, we have electric cars now, it's this great thing. We had like 800 electric taxi cabs in the early 1900s in New York City. And I'll tell you why people love them so much. They were zero emission compared to the horses. They were. Because the horses were leaving a lot of excrement around the city, and that was one of the main reasons for these. And they had charging stations and battery swap stations. And then mysteriously, the warehouse that had all the electric taxi cabs burned down. It's sort of like the streetcars. So now we have them again. And we also have self-driving cars that are coming. And actually, Elon came out last week, I think, or the week before, and said, actually, we'll have most of those features in 2015. And so what people don't realize is that the rate of change in terms of technology is not linear, and it really is exponential. I mean, my iPhone is more popular, or more powerful, excuse me, than the Craig supercomputer. And I can do an EKG on myself with my phone, not that I want to, but, and in terms of all this tension between the modes, which we hear about all the time, you know, the Ubers and the taxis and the bicycles. When you're in your car, you hate the cyclist. When you're a cyclist, you hate the pedestrian. And everybody's, I mean, look at this. There was so much change. We had 8,000 automobiles in 1900 and like, I think 30 million by this time. We still had horse and buggies rolling around. That horse is getting ready to run right into the electric streetcar. And, you know, what's the last mile? Is it going to be vehicles like this, like the ones that MIT was cooking up, or will it be my wife on her bike share bike? I know, it's not that funny. And yes, there are new companies coming to the fore, whether it's Uber or Lyft or Bridge, which is trying to take big data and make transit more flexible, which is going to be controversial. You know, traditional transit folks may not like it. Again, it's not really a new idea. It's old meets new. Bike share is an old thing, a bike, with a bunch of new technology that makes it accessible to a lot of people on the fly for point-to-point use. Jitney buses are not new, but the idea of using big data to make them flexible, so it's more like a taxi meets the bus, makes it a significantly different service. And with over 1 billion data inputs, it can get pretty smart pretty quick, but it's always going to get smarter over time. And that's all these systems. All these systems are the same way. There's Lyftline and Uberpool, which, unlike what Bridge is doing, which is demand aggregated transit, which relies on very specific algorithms, these guys are doing carpool algorithms, but it's still very interesting and it works. I used Uberpool the other day in San Francisco. It worked great. Turns out the guy in the car, we knew mutual people. We ended up tweeting at each other afterwards. It was sort of like they could have done a commercial out of it, but it really did work, and it saved a trip from the airport. Now, there are those that are going to sort of scare people and say, you know, this is the end of that, and that's the end of this. And there's some truth to it. You know, with all change, something's going to suffer. You know, there was a conversation in the last panel about the taxi companies. And here's one issue I have with that. We tend to look at the taxi companies as a public utility, and we tend to look at Lyft and Uber as these private behemoths, which is sort of true, in terms of Uber at least. But, you know, those jobs, those taxi jobs are not great jobs. The average salary is $22,000 a year, and the average hours worked are 60 to 80. I think they make like about $5 an hour. And I ride with Uber drivers who regularly make $50,000 to $90,000 part-time because they drive when they want. And they really do sort of own their own business. So we have to be careful, though, with our preconceived notions of sort of what something is versus this. Like, are those great jobs? And I was at the White House talking about this recently, and they said, yeah, but we're displacing taxi jobs. And I said, yeah, but those aren't very good jobs. You know, the average taxi driver works like 12 hours a day. They're tired. They're not getting paid much. The Lyft driver works like 4 hours a day. Many of them are going to school, and they might have their own business, and they do this, right? And it's the same thing with public transit. Are we providing, in every case, a great quality service for our constituents? I don't know. I think some of the core service is awesome. The BRT, the regional service, the arterial service. We have some communities in DC that get one bus an hour running to one place. I don't know. I think we're doing the bare minimum in some cases. And you also have people saying, oh, driverless cars. That's really scary, right? Well, I think what's scary is all of us driving around in our cars, distracted by our phones, having a couple beers after work. It's okay, getting in the car. That's scary to me. Not driverless cars. But there is industry that will tell you that it's scary, because guess what? If driverless cars become the norm, 85% of cars will go away. That's the current figure. What does that mean? It means a lot of stuff, including the fact that you can get rid of a lot of parking spaces. Just imagine if you gain back one side of every single street in America. You know, we're always fighting in these DOTs to try to figure out how to put a bike lane and how to widen the sidewalk, still maintain 2 lanes of parking and 2 lanes for traffic, or 4 lanes for traffic. We don't have to do that anymore. So in terms of, you know, making this change permanent and stick, DOTs have to change. And city DOTs have changed over the last 5 years, I would say. State DOTs have not. And they need to. They need to catch up. We also have to set aggressive plans, not just plans, but plans with specific metrics that we commit to hit over a constrained period of time. In this case, we had over 120 metrics we committed to hit, and we hit at least 90 of them. And we built lots of plans. Many of them, though, with very specific metrics. And when we didn't hit them, we would publicly embarrass ourselves and say that we didn't do it. And I would publicly embarrass the staff that didn't accomplish it. But also, I'd hold them up when they did accomplish it. And in government, that just doesn't happen enough. The other thing that we did, and I was really proud of the mayor for getting behind this, is we called out the pedestrian as our core focus in our modal hierarchy. The sign of a healthy city is the pedestrian. The transit user, the cyclist, the auto user are also pedestrians, by the way. And we're continuing to redesign our streets around people. And we took a page from New York and Montreal and San Francisco and designed these people spots that were low cost. And we turned them over to the private sector and the SSAs and the bids and all of those folks. But we cut through the red tape, helped with the design, and helped them to get them done. So it's interesting. How am I doing on time, by the way? Does anybody know? Oh, I'll be fast. Okay. So the problem that we have, though, is we're not putting the money where we need it. There's sort of this inverse relationship. We actually have great healthcare facilities in this country. We don't have great sidewalks, public transit, and bike infrastructure. And this, by the way, is showing what the public sector and the private sector think. And this is a ULI study. So we're not putting our money where we need to. And we also don't realize it's not just about moving people. It's about creating place. And I get all kinds of criticism about the streetcars. And I'm a big supporter of the streetcar. And I keep telling people it's not about how fast you can move them through your city. It's about what you're creating in that place that you're moving them through. And we figured out that we're going to get a lot of investment around the streetcar that we wouldn't get around traditional bus. Maybe around BRT we could capture some of that. Sorry that's a little blurry. And we also have to think about what is transit going to look like and be open to the fact that it may change dramatically with autonomous and vehicle-to-vehicle technology working in tandem. Cars will be turning or talking to each other and running in convoys. And literally before the car in front of you stops, your car will know, and they will move together. And so whether it's a car or a 10-passenger bus or a 54-passenger bus, I don't know if it's going to matter as much. And that's a little scary for transit planners, but it's true, and it's nothing to be afraid of. And I think people are realizing now that this will be the biggest change in our cities in the next 50 years. It will absolutely reshape the way our cities look, feel, and work. Imagine no signals anymore. You won't need them. And again, the end of parking as we know it, which means we don't have to use our public space and buildings to store our cars. In fact, people are so confident in driverless cars, the public, not necessarily the government, that they'd let their kids ride driverless as much as they would let themselves drive. And this is one of the reasons, because there's not a huge difference between 20 and 40 miles per hour if you're watching a car move down the street, but at 40, there's an 80% chance you're going to die if you're hit by a car. There's a 5% chance you'll die at 20 miles per hour. So there's a huge, huge difference. And already we're looking at what can we do with this parking we built that nobody wants. And there's some interesting designs coming out of this. There aren't enough hotel rooms in New York. It's always too expensive. What if your parking spaces were hotel rooms at night? And micro units are going in. We have 3 of these going into DC. And now we're nervous about about poverty moving to the suburbs, which are going to feel more like our cities felt over the last 50 years. There are some suburbs out there, and I do encourage you guys to read this article in salon.com about the future of the suburb and how they've gone from 7 million square feet of office space to 40 million square feet of office space, more than Dallas, more than Denver, in a suburb. And their congestion's gone down by 15 to 30% on every major arterial. And people are voting with their dollars. They're moving to places, as long as they can afford it, that are walkable urban spaces. And so I encourage everybody in this room to think in an open-minded way about these new technologies and not to be afraid of them, but to embrace them, whether they be in the cloud or on the street or wayfinding. They're different, but they can be utilized. And that includes these mega regions, and hopefully Florida will be okay, by the way, for any of you that are from Florida. I really pray, although it's built on a stone that is basically completely porous, so I don't know. And we are going to get high-speed rail, and it is going to come to California, and it will create big TOD, excuse me. I think there's mini TOD, which is bike share, and there's big TOD, which is high-speed rail. And you will see cities spring up around these places that some of the politicians are claiming are just wastelands. And last but not least, just to leave on a good note, this is me and my daughter on our new bike. And at the end of the day, I really think that we are only as good as city leaders or researchers or business people as our sort of most, as the people that can be hurt the easiest in our cities. And that's our kids, that's our elderly people, that's our disabled, that's our poor. And I think some of these private services also that are coming down the pipe, they are lowering the cost and they're making our streets safer. So we have to be careful sort of defending our fiefdoms because ultimately it's these folks that matter, not our fiefdoms. Thank you.
So if anybody has questions or comments, you're welcome to come down to the mic holders. I thought ending on the issue of children's safety was a really interesting one because that 1928 street picture you showed of New York City with the the horse-drawn coach about to drive into the electric trolley car, that was a really interesting period in American transportation history because here in Manhattan was really ground zero for it. Just hundreds, tens and hundreds of thousands of automobiles showing up suddenly, and the sort of social consensus around how streets would be used had to be renegotiated because they were killing a lot of kids. Kids used to play in the streets. And that was really the period when we saw the rise of traffic engineering and the regulation of streets as a resource for automobiles. And, looking at all of the work that's been done by you and others around complete streets and getting that implemented and essentially negotiating a new deal about how road space is going to be utilized, I have to wonder, I'd be curious what your thoughts are on this. Is that negotiation done now? And is complete streets, is that the new formula? Or are all of these new transportation technologies, in particular self-driving cars, going to require us to constantly be renegotiating what the new deal is around who gets to use the streets?
Well, that's a great question. I realized I lost my train of thought looking at that picture because I saw my daughter and I'm just like enamored. I met the most vulnerable users of our streets, but I sort of lost train of thought. I think it's an ecosystem. I think that we're so linear in our thinking, and we want to sort of break out the different bits of it and try to rationalize it. And the reality is it all works together. Like it's a big soup, if you will. And to try to figure out all the elements of that soup would be simpler and would be more easy for us to understand, but it's not really how it works, So for instance, the self-driving car, let's call it autonomous technology because it can be utilized in buses or trains or anything. The beauty of it is it uses our existing infrastructure with no upgrades. Whereas a lot of the other technologies that people have floated out there, even vehicle to vehicle, the old vehicle to vehicle technology, you had to have some infrastructure in the ground, and so those things are going to take a long time. PRT, that never happened because of all the infrastructure. So infrastructure light solutions, high tech solutions, and easy to implement street changes are obviously sort of the most beneficial in the short term. And I think what we're trying to do then is, as we have the big projects like the expressway or the freeway or bridge, in your city that you don't need anymore, you get rid of it. We had the Ashland overpass that we're tearing down. Portland tore down their double-decker on the waterfront. Same with the Embarcadero. So you have these major projects come up once in a while, or a big streetscape, and when you do that, you try to build a complete street, or you get rid of the highway, right? But then day to day, you try to enable all the things. It might be Uber and Lyft. It might be a new type of bus service that can make change quickly. And the thing about bike share that just surprised the hell out of people was culturally how fast you can completely change the landscape. Like bike lanes are great, and we put in some cool bike lanes in DC, but I would say we probably had more impact with bike share, because we switched the balance of power in the streets to people walking and biking and taking transit.
Yeah, that brings up actually one of the other things I was wondering about listening to you talk. A lot of the things that you did in government were very rapid, very cost-effective, very tactical interventions that had a huge impact. And you see that, like we heard this morning about here in New York City, we're struggling to figure out how to fund just enough to keep this $1 trillion asset that we have in our subway system afloat. And there seems to be a real kind of lack of ability in government to get big projects done, right? And so you see this focus on like fast reward. At the same time, you have people like Elon Musk. You have people like Larry Page and Sergey Brin at Google coming out with these visions of like systemic change and building vast new infrastructures. And Travis Kalanick at Uber basically wants to take over the auto industry and get all the money that we spend on cars. Yeah. And Uber's market valuation is based on that assumption. How do you, as someone who's sort of worked on both sides, like how do you see the role of leadership, the role of big visions and innovation playing out both in the public sector and the private sector, and how are they going to work together? I mean, how are we going to see some alignment there?
That is, first of all, just a great setup and great way you pose that question, because public and private have got to work together. Or the reason I put up those first two slides to bum people out, and I think I forgot to say this, was that if we don't work together, public and private, we will not solve those problems. We cannot reach the solution because the public sector controls sort of the board, if you will, like the monopoly board, and the private sector has a lot of the innovation and the money to get these things done. And so we have to come together. But I think what's interesting about the examples you gave is like, okay, so you have Elon Musk and you got Uber. So Elon, who I think is brilliant, and by the way, I think he's a good person that wants to create positive change. All three of his businesses, Solar City, which is a great company, Tesla, and SpaceX, all function on government subsidy. Big government subsidy. Without federal government subsidies for batteries and for solar panels and for space through NASA, he would not have any of those companies, and they would not be where they are. So I think we have to remember that. With Travis over at Uber, look, Uber is a powerful company, but they're sort of like that snake with the big hood, because they are just as disruptible as anybody else. I mean, they're trying to grab as much market share as possible, and they're very bright and very smart people. They're doing exactly what they should be doing from a business standpoint. But like, there's this new company I was talking about at lunch, I think it's called Zoologia, that is basically trying to completely democratize ride sharing so anybody can do it anytime for free and turn on their car, which could be the undoing of Uber. So that's what's fascinating about the technology that we have now, is that you think this company's big today, and tomorrow they may not be around.
Are there any questions out here in the audience?
Yes, I have a question preceded by a comment. Urban areas are major centers, or major economic centers. Basically, most of the wealth in the planet is produced in urban and metropolitan areas. And reflecting that, urban areas are basically major centers of production and consumption of cargo. Just to give you a basic statistic, about 65% of all the cargo transported in the US either originates or have as a destination an urban area. And in essence, you send money in one direction and you get cargo on the opposite. And I couldn't help but notice that in your beautiful slides, in which you have the pedestrian, the buses, and all of that, freight is nowhere to be seen. And I would like to get your reactions to that.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I do have slides on freight, but they aren't in here. But freight is very important. And running the DOT in Chicago, I learned a tremendous amount about the importance. As 25% of the country's freight comes through Chicago. It's also actually a huge haven for drugs from Mexico and other places that also meet in Chicago. So there's all kinds of freight coming through there. But it's a huge issue. I think a lot of these things are going to sort of work themselves out over time with technology, in that 3D printing is in its very, very, very early stages. But from brilliant folks that I've talked to that follow this stuff, they say, look, in 20 years, we'll probably be printing our own iPhones at home. You'll have more movement of raw materials on trains, but less giant boxes of stuff from China. And you're already seeing some of that happen, not because of 3D printing, but you're seeing it happen because the cost to manufacture in China is getting too expensive versus the transportation cost to bring it over here, because their quality of life is going up. And so now jobs are coming back here. I'm not really answering your question, I know. But what I'm saying is that this is going to continue to evolve. And I think the way that we consume is going to change dramatically, particularly as we get more and more and more congested into our neighborhoods. When we did the 2050 plan for Washington, D.C., 3D printing wasn't, that was like 4 years ago. 3D printing wasn't even really around yet, so we didn't even factor that in. But we figured, due to floods in places as far-flung as Southeast Asia and in Miami, that we would have so many people moving to Washington, D.C. because its proximity to jobs and the federal government, that people would actually, in Adams Morgan, which is a neighborhood in D.C., would not be able to commute to Fairfax anymore, efficiently. It just wasn't going to happen. So people, we think, are going to move a lot less. They're going to stay in their neighborhoods more. They're going to work in their neighborhoods more. They're going to produce food in their neighborhoods. They're going to produce energy in their neighborhoods. Solar panels are going up on houses just left, right, and center all over. So I guess what I'm saying is, just to give you a real macro answer, is I think we're going to consume so much differently in 20 years that I think it'll be less of an issue. But I do think that, like, Daimler released their autonomous truck to the press just a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago. And the idea that all the trucks on the road could be autonomous, and there are logistics companies like Coyote that are helping to fill trucks both ways, that we can much more efficiently use our roadway assets and our shipping assets and make them safer.
Could I press you to share a little bit of what Bridge is thinking about in that area? Because this is kind of the big speculation in the sort of transport tech geek space right now is, should or would or will Uber ever try to automate all of its taxis, and what would be the economic implications of that? But I think it's far more interesting to think about, can we automate buses and jitneys and other kinds of transit systems, transit vehicles like that, to get similar gains in the public sphere?
Yes. I mean, first of all, Uber already is planning to do that. That's a fact. And you may have heard Travis say that, it's going to be a lot cheaper when we get rid of that dude in the driver's seat, which his drivers didn't like too much. But if you think there's disruption now or tension with the taxis, I mean, you wait till, not just financially it makes more sense, but cities are saying, we don't want people driving in our core anymore. It's not safe. Too many people get killed. More people get hit by cars in New York City than die of murder, right? So it's going to change. At Bridge, we're focused on the algorithms to demand aggregate to get, to pick people up within 5 minutes of their origin, charge them $5, and drop them off 5 minutes from their destination. Now, if we can bring packages with us at the same time, why not? If we can carry freight in those vehicles, I mean, I think the days of vehicles doing one thing are going to be short-lived too. I mean, you can now adjust a vehicle in minutes to get rid of all the seats, and so I think having flexibility and being willing to do different things during the course of a day is going to be crucial. And Uber's already played with that model a little bit as well.
So your exit strategy is to get acquired by Domino's Pizza. Is that?
Well, I hadn't thought of that one. I'm gonna take that back to Cambridge tonight.
Are there other questions out here before we take a break?
Oh, plenty of time.
Yeah, hi. My name's Deborah Sala, and I'm at Arizona State University. And I hadn't thought much about autonomous cars or self-driving cars until last spring when I went to an event that was held at the Google campus to talk about this issue. And one thing that happened at that event was there was a thought-provoking presentation made by the founder of Zipcar, actually. She got up and talked about how wonderful self-driving cars could be, or how horrible they could be, depending on governance and ownership models and sort of who's in control of them. So I wanted to hear your comments on that issue.
Yeah. So you're talking about Robin Chase.
Yeah.
I'm actually staying at her house tonight, and we have this argument. Although we won't have it tonight because she's in Europe, but I'm just crashing at her house. We had this argument out of Google. She and I went out there together and rode in the self-driving cars, and we don't totally agree on this. I think where we do agree is that what you don't want is like autonomous vehicles just roving around on their own. Like you just send one to the grocery store for you, and that's the example she makes. So I've been working with NACTO, and thinking about how autonomous technology can be utilized. And the example I gave of using the space that we take away from cars. I mean, think about what happened with the streetcar. We got rid of the streetcars, and then what happened? The cars just took over because we didn't have any public policy around it, or maybe we wanted them to take over. I'm not sure, but maybe But the fact is that we have this rare opportunity now, like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, to plan together as public policy people to shape the change. Like, don't let Google decide how it's going to roll out. And there's a lot of other companies with this technology. It's not just Google. By the way, Google, and I've worked with them on this, I think they're a good company and they want to do good things. They just don't know what that thing is. They're a technology company. They're not a public policy company. They're not a city government company. And so the next time the Uber and the Lyft thing happens, let's not turn our back on them and sort of flip them off and then let them run us over with their technology. Let's engage them and use it how we want to use it, right? And that could mean autonomous buses. It could mean that, we'll let them into our city, but we're going to first work on the citywide plan to reestablish sort of what parking looks like and, what our zoning looks like and all of these changes. And I think if we do that, then it can be a win-win-win. if we are scared of change and we do the typical sort of government thing, it can be bad. It can't be that bad. I mean, it can't be worse than it is today, right? Not really. Well, okay, so yeah, but here's what Robin's saying though. Robin is a big fan of, like Peers Inc., and peer-to-peer stuff. And what she wants to see, and she's right, and what I want to see is shared autonomous vehicles. And like all this crap about like I have a Mercedes and you have an Audi and you have this, nobody's going to give a shit because they're just going to be getting in a vehicle, and pardon my French, but I get a little passionate about this, that they're just going to want to get from point A to point B. And the cars are all going to look the same. And you'll have a rich guy that has an autonomous Ferrari, right? And people in the suburbs may want to have their own car that they can turn the autonomous on and off, right? But I think when you hit the city limits, most of the cars are going to look the same. You're going to have to turn the autonomous functionality on if you want to be in the city. That's my theory anyway.
It's funny, I get into this argument a lot with some colleagues at BMW because they really believe that the driving experience is what sells cars. And I say Apple is creating much more engaging experiences that people want to look at when they're in a vehicle than anything that you can put on the dashboard.
Yeah. Well, at City Lab a few weeks ago in LA, which is great, by the way, put on by the Aspen Institute in the Atlantic, we had a roundtable, sort of closed-door roundtable session, and General Motors was in there. And I said, look, I realize that I probably won't get invited back to this General Motors sponsored session next year. But I said, look, there's people in this room that are not going to be here in 10 years. If we have 85% fewer cars, if we had 15% fewer cars, a lot of companies are going out of business. 85%? But that's why Daimler's invested in like over 20 different service businesses. They all see the writing on the wall. But, like the tobacco industry, they're going to keep selling cigarettes as long as they can. It's like Chris Rock said. He's like, I don't know if anybody's a fan of Chris Rock. I'm a huge fan. And he said, like, you think Cadillac can't make a car with a bumper that doesn't fall off if you hit it at 5 miles an hour? He's like, they could, but they aren't that expletive stupid. I mean, there's a lot of money. We have entire industries built on the back of the automobile, the oil industry. So the beauty of technology is sort of like the great equalizer. It's giving the people power if they take it, right? Otherwise, the power is with all the legacy systems and the legacy companies. So I actually think it's the best thing to ever happen to us.
One last question, and then we're going to stop.
Hi, Sarah Kaufman from the Rudin Center. Gabe, in light of your discussions about climate change and the need for transportation systems going forward to be nimble and lightweight, it seems like you're kind of predicting the end of the heavy rail traditional subway. Is that something you mean to imply, or?
No, I actually think, personally, I absolutely love rail and I love the subway. I love BRT. I worked on that in Chicago. I think that our cities are going to get so much more congested. Imagine some part of our country did, heaven forbid, go underwater, and 4.5 million people had to migrate to other cities. Then, whether it's Uber or Lyft or Bridge, cities are going to be paying subsidy to utilize those options because the subway can't handle it. But the subway and the BRT line and the basic bus network is the absolute backbone of our transportation system, and we need to fund those to the hilt. So I'm certainly not saying that. I'm just saying that the need is so much bigger than what we can supply with our legacy systems that we've got to use these lightweight systems or we're going to be in real trouble in terms of competing, or heaven forbid we ever have natural disasters to deal with.
Great. Well, let's give Gabe a hand. Thank him for joining us. Oh, why don't we take it offline? Yep.
Yeah.
One last question?
Okay, quick. Okay. Yeah.
It's very quick. We have quite a few people here coming from other parts of the world than Europe or Asia, or I'm sorry, in the States. So if you look into less developed countries, how to apply the technology in a smart way?
Yeah. Well, I'll just say, I'm an admirer of many of the other countries out there, But for instance, like you can't just say Europe has done all these great things. There's some countries in Europe that have done great things, and some countries that are in the same boat we are, or worse. But I think these technologies will be applied around the world. And I think many of the European countries that have already sort of made more sense of their urban core. Like I was in Deventer a few years ago in the Netherlands, where in the urban core in the downtown center, you can't ride a bike. It's too dangerous. They only allow walking. And you get outside of that core and you can walk and bike. And you get outside of that ring of downtown, and you're basically like, there's farmland. You can drive, walk, bike, and they still have bike lanes, by the way, out in those areas. So you know, I think in some ways it'll be easier in some other places. But yeah, I think it'll happen everywhere, and it'll happen a lot faster than people think.
Okay, with that, let's call it a wrap. Thank you very much, Gabe.